go there either. But it's interesting, as I heard this testimony and as time has gone on over the years, I've witnessed numerous people who have done this very thing. We've seen them. These are people that we've deeply admired and respected, even people in full-time ministries that we have seen that they have backslidden and fallen away from Jesus, and many have fallen very deeply and miserably. And when we see people that do this, and when we experience this in our own lives, it brings back a myriad of emotions in us, doesn't it? It brings back great pain. It brings pity. It even can bring anger within us. But the truth is, falling away from Jesus is really a relative thing. Jesus said to the 12, "You'll all fall away. You'll all abandon me." In the same way, all of us have fallen by varying degrees away from Jesus at different times, haven't we? If we're really honest with ourselves, we've all been there. But when we taste the sweet wine of life in Jesus and the joys of salvation, we keep coming back to that question: is why do so many people choose to turn away from it? Why do we choose to turn away from Jesus, who touches our lives and affects us and impacts us in such dramatic ways? Why do we do it? Do you ever ask that question? Why do I do this? We go back to the Matrix. Why would this man go back to a life controlled by the machines that would eventually sap the life out of him? Why would a follower of Jesus go back to a world controlled by old red legs that just leads to our own demise? But on the other side of the coin, maybe another question I could ask for some of you that are considering even following Jesus tonight, a question that we could ask is, well, why even follow Jesus in the first place? Because it can appear, when we look at things on the surface level, that this Jesus is calling us to a life of things like self-sacrifice, of things like giving things to people instead of accumulating things for ourselves. That he's called us to a life that we're supposed to be more concerned of others' needs instead of our own. And it seems like he's there to kind of squelch our fun instead of stimulate our lives. So why would we even consider following Jesus? And you may be in this room right now, and those are your very thoughts. The world can offer us things like sensual pleasures, excitement, doing things my way. I heard a statistic that in funerals, the number one song that is played in funerals is Frank Sinatra singing, "I've Done It My Way." So going back to Judas, the question is, why choose to follow a guy who chooses to die? It's a crazy question, isn't it? And I'm calling this the Judas complex. Going back to this passage in Mark, the deeper question is why did Judas betray Jesus? Holy cow. When you think about it, think about Judas. He hung out with Jesus personally for 3 years. And they traveled all around Palestine, which is today Israel. And he saw Jesus talk about the kingdom of God. He saw Jesus teach in ways that no one's ever taught before. He saw Jesus heal the sick, take a crippled man's hand and touch it, and it comes to full life. He saw Jesus speak to a demonized boy, that the demons are throwing him into the fire, and cast a demon out of the young boy, and the boy is completely healed. And he saw Jesus raise a friend from the dead after he'd been stinking in the grave for 3 days. He saw all of this, and why in the world would he betray him? Did you ever think about that? It's difficult to wrap our minds around that, isn't it? It's like, I would never do that. Maybe we would. I want to do a case study of Judas in Mark. Now we're going to Mark 14, verse 43. And it says, just as he was speaking, Judas, one of the 12, appeared. This is as Jesus was praying in the garden with Peter, James, and John. And he says, look, here comes my betrayer. It says, with him was a crowd armed with swords and clubs sent from the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders. Now the betrayer, Judas, had arranged a signal with them. The one I kiss is the man. Arrest him, lead him away under guard. It was dark, and so it was hard to see who was Jesus. Going at once to Jesus, Judas said, Rabbi, and kissed him. The men seized Jesus and arrested him. Then one of those standing near drew his sword and struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear. Good thing he was a bad aim. Am I leading a rebellion, said Jesus, that you have come out with swords and clubs to capture me? Every day I was with you, teaching in the temple courts, and you did not arrest me, but the scriptures must be fulfilled. Underline that in your mind. But the scriptures must be fulfilled. Say that with me. But the scriptures must be fulfilled. What the foul ball is Jesus talking about here? And it says, then everyone deserted him and fled. Just like Jesus said, all the disciples ran for their lives. It's difficult how to comprehend this is how could Judas do this? Now, one of the things that I considered in looking at this passage and looking at the life of Judas, I see a couple things. And I want to challenge all of us to think about what elements of these two things are in me. The first thing is, it appears that Judas came to Jesus for personal gain and advancement. Judas was similar to most of the Jews in that day. He wanted a Messiah that would deliver Palestine into their hands. They wanted a king that would overcome the Romans and lead the Hebrew people to world dominance, where they wouldn't live under the control and oppression of Rome anymore, where they could be calling the shots for once in their lives. If we're quite honest with ourselves, if we were living under the tyrannical rule of Rome, many of us would probably feel the same way, wouldn't we? And it's believed that Judas was the treasurer of Jesus' movement. Maybe he was a CPA or a bookkeeper of some kind. And he might have had hopes that one day his sacrifice of following Jesus for these past 3 years and him controlling the money that Jesus and his group were utilizing to fulfill the ministry, that he was thinking that maybe when Jesus takes over, I'll get a mansion on a golf course in Jerusalem. But now Jesus is doing all this crazy talk. He's saying things like he'd be arrested, that he'd be killed, that he'd be buried and he'd be resurrected 3 days later. He was talking about him being handed over to the authorities. He even predicted that Jerusalem and the temple would be destroyed to the point that not one stone would be left standing on another. What the heck was Jesus talking about? This wasn't what Judas signed up for, man. He did not sign up to follow a man that by all purposes and from man's point of view was a failure. He wanted a big piece of the pie. He must have been disillusioned, and he must have been incredibly disappointed with the turn that Jesus was making at the end of his ministry. And so this brings us, let's personalize this a little bit. When we come to Jesus, if you've come to Jesus, and some of you maybe recently have come to Jesus, the question I want to throw out there is, why did we come to Jesus? What did we sign up for? Let's personalize this. Did we come to Jesus for any personal gain? Did we come to Jesus to make our life better? Did we come to Jesus to find relief from this pit that we seem to have dug ourselves and thrown ourselves in? Have we come to Jesus to kind of fill up our checkbooks? Have we come to Jesus to give us a beautiful spouse? By the way, I want to introduce the newlyweds, Mr. and Mrs. Wade and Chelsea Yamaguchi. Welcome, guys. Just got back from their honeymoon last night, and don't they look so in love? I told Wade, man, you look different. You look married or something. See, the problem with this mindset, though, if we come to Jesus for personal gain, is we're still living for ourselves. We haven't really sold out to Jesus. In fact, there's this thinking of this coming to Jesus so that we never have problems anymore. This sets us up for incredible disillusionment, and it sets us up for complete anger at God. And I've seen this happen. It's happened to me. But when you look at the full counsel of God, by looking at all of the scriptures, we can pick out a verse like 1 Peter 5:8, where Peter said, be self-controlled and alert, because he's saying, hey guys, this is the world we live in now. Your enemy, the devil, have you ever heard of him? He prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour, and friends, that's you and me. Fortunately, he doesn't like Japanese food. It says, resist him, standing firm in the faith, because you know that your brothers throughout the world are undergoing the same kind of what? Sufferings. He doesn't say blessings. He says sufferings. And the God of all grace, who called you to his eternal glory in Christ, after you have suffered a little while, will himself restore you and make you strong, firm, and steadfast. You see, one of the things that I have experienced in my own life is through suffering. That's where I learn and understand more about the faithfulness of God. I learn more about how we become stronger in him, and we also learn how to stand firm and stand against the enemy and become victorious against the enemy. We can only learn that as we engage in the fight. So, as I said, in reality, the scriptures never promises that we will never suffer. He never promises that your life will be all peachy keen and hunky-dory and you'll never struggle again. What he does promise, though, is that in the midst of that, he will be there with us. And that's what we experience. In no other way do we experience God's presence in that sort of way than we are in the midst of suffering. And some of you right now, you're probably crying out, God, I could use your presence right now, because you are in the midst of some great suffering. And in faith, trust that God somehow is going to reveal himself to you. And sometimes we don't see that until we come out the other side. And this kind of tailspins into it goes into the next thing that I see here is one of the pitfalls that Judas had was bad theology. He had misconceptions about who Jesus was and what his mission was. Total misconceptions. You see, if you read the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you see that Jesus was always zeroed in on, and he was always